What are gunas and what are the three gunas available in nature? Paramatma and the scriptures drastically depart from conventional thought as to how the universe was created. Remember, the perceived universe is only a reflection of the qualities of the inner self. It is to be read as a reflection in order to enable the Atma to evolve, to shed the dependence on the physical self. So since the universe is only an instrument of the forces of consciousness, including the mind, the universe is said to be formed due to the imbalances of the forces in Jivatma and its main instrument, the mind. To apply a bit of modern physics, forces come into existence only due to imbalances. If there was a perfect balance, there would be no forces that would be created or come into play. Guna, by guna we mean that this is a thread or a strand or cord or twine. In more abstract uses, it may mean subdivision, species, kind or quality, or operational principle or tendency. In Samkhya philosophy, there are three major gunas that serve as the fundamental operating principles or tendencies of Prakriti or universal nature, which are called Sattva guna, Rajas guna and Tamas guna. These three primary gunas are generally accepted to be associated with creation, preservation and destruction. The entire creation and its process of evolution is carried out by these three major gunas. The three guna appear prominently in the discourse of Krishna to Arjuna upon the battlefield of the Kurukshetra, that is the backdrop of the Bhagavad Gita. All three gunas are held to delude the world. Krishna says that the world is deluded by the three gunas, but it does not know me, who is beyond these gunas and is imperishable. If you watch till the end, you would come to know as to how the Atman is not affected by these gunas. Also, please don't forget to like, share and subscribe to my channel. The power behind perception is the Atma. Atma, when completely balanced, is the moksham state. But when one or more of these three gunas, sattvic, rajasic and tamasic, begins to dominate, then the Atma becomes attached to the physical world through the sense organs and more importantly through the mind. What causes the perception to be born in the state of imbalance? What is this imbalance that causes the Atma to perceive the universe? In Srimad Bhagavatam, the Paramatma explains the human perception was caused by an imbalance between the three gunas. When the three gunas are balanced, there will be no perception of the universe. The three gunas of the mind are Sattva, Rajas and Tamas. Brahman, because of Maya and the power of Maya, appeared to have two forms, the seer and the seen, the drishta and the drishtam. The seer is named as Purusha and the seen is named as Prakriti. The Prakriti is made up of the cause and effect. The Purusha is the pure knowledge or Jnana. Prakriti began to function and out of it were manifested the three gunas, Tamas, Rajas and Sattva. Out of these three gunas was born the subtle power which causes Kriya or action. Krishna explained in the Srimad Bhagavatam that I will explain you by going back to the beginnings of creation to make it simple for you. When Ishvara created Maya, the world was manifested. The five elements called Mahabhutas, the Indriyas and the Tanmantras, and later the many lokas were manifested. Ishwar pervades the entire universe, but because of Maya, the avidya or the ignorance envelops the mind of a man. This university of the Ishvara is hidden and concealed. The man gets involved in illusion. As I am the doer, I am enjoying the fruits of the action and such like. This again leads to further details about actions. You shall do this and this act is forbidden, etc. It is then said that certain acts should be performed for enhancing sattvic nature in man. When the sattvic nature gains ascendancy, the mind becomes clearer. Once the mind is clear, it is up to the man to rid himself of the bondage called action. So it is safe to conclude that sattva is a state of a mind in which the man rids himself of the delusion of the I as being responsible for his ability to perceive all his actions. It is an advanced state of the mind in which the man rids himself of all his delusions. On Rajasic Guna, the following explanation has been provided. The Karmendriyas, the organs of action, and the Jnanendriyas, the organs of perception, are born of Rajasic Tattva. Rajas stands for all active emotions like anger, passion, not easily controlled. So the Rajasic Guna is the perpetrator of action and emotion in the mind. On the Tamasic Guna, out of the Tamasic Aham Tattva are born the Mahabhutas, the elements, and the Tanmantras. At the physical level, creation is the same as birth, preservation is same as life, and destruction is the same as death. If the three gunas were in the state of balance, there would be no separation between creation, preservation, and destruction. In other words, there would be no perception of the physical universe. In simpler terms, the mind is the instrument of perception. The mind is created by the imbalance of the three gunas. The three gunas are in a constant state of struggle to attain supremacy. This imbalance is reflected in the constantly swirling human mind. The swirling is the karma that we experience for the time of our human life. Unable to bear the imbalance, the mind consciously seeks middle ground in which it does not feel the impact of the pulls and pushes of the opposites. The mind cannot lose the pull of the temptations, strays from the middle ground, and faces the consequent backlashes. In turning to the various alternatives for peace, tranquility, and freedom, which is the true nature of the Atma, it comes across the teachings of the Paramatma, which is self-realization through devotion. The mind learns that it does not have to turn anywhere else except to itself and find the answer and quell the turmoil within. One by one, it sheds the illusion and attachments that it was subject to. It then attains unification with the Atma and is freed forever from the repeated cycle of births and deaths. Everything that we perceive in this world is constantly changing. Imbalances characterize the physical world. If there were no imbalances, there would be no perception. In a completely steady state with no changes, the mind would not get ability to perceive. The instruments of perception deployed in the mind are the five senses. The five senses are activated only by changes and imbalances. It should be emphasized that the perception of the separation of the gunas arise only in the mind. As such, the Puranas do not attach any significance to physical creation, sustenance, or destruction. This is why our rishis focused on stilling the mind to attain the state of moksha. So moksha means to attain a state of mind without any imbalances of the three gunas. The perceived universe, being in a state of imbalance, is constantly in a state of motion to attempt to resolve the imbalance. This change in physical objects resulting from these imbalances, either through movement or through physical, chemical, biological transformation, is called by modern science as energy and by Puranas as karma. Modern science is focused on channelizing the imbalances so the energy can be used in a manner that is useful to man. The Puranas are focused only on removing these imbalances by developing self-control of the mind. The only power that has been left in our control is that of our own thought. If the attitude is taken that everything else is secondary, then this perceived world will no longer trouble us. On the contrary, life will become very pleasant experience. More importantly, life will align itself and allow you to make even more progress on the intellectual front. The God consciousness assertion in the Puranas is that when the mind reaches this balanced state of existence, there will be no longer any physical constraints of space, time, and conflict. Without restrictions and conflicts, the mind will reach a state of pure and unbounded enlightenment, very much akin to merging with God consciousness. It is the mind of a man which causes him to either fall into the morass called samsara or to find freedom from it. It is the mind which should be subdued. When the mind is tainted with the three gunas, Satmam, Rajas, and Tamas, its path is set in the world of objects. it will have to keep on performing actions, good or bad, and the cycle of births and deaths will be endless. It will acquire desires, and according to the desires, its progress will be towards the higher or towards the lower, as the case may be. Pleasure and pain will affect the life of man, and there will be no end to it. So long as the mind of a man is attached to things of the world, it can never glow on its own accord. The three qualities, the sattva, rajas and tamas, are parts of nature, and they have nothing to do with the Atman. One who has reached the Atman, who has reached the Brahman state, will never be affected by the opposites. In the beginning, there was nothing else. Brahman, the soul of all the souls, the lord of nature, the cause and the effect, blended into one. He was the seer, and in the beginning, there was nothing to be seen. The Brahman was self-luminous. Prakriti was with him. The power to manifest himself was in him. In the beginning, the three gunas, sattva, rajas and tamas, were perfectly balanced. They were in equilibrium. Another powerful aspect of the Brahman is time. Now, because of the passage of time, the balance of the gunas are upset, disturbed. There was a throb of unrest, that is disturbance, and this disturbance had in it the germs of creation. The power because of which the Purusha creates the universe is called Prakriti. The active aspect of the Brahman, which is the consciousness, awareness. The power because of which the Purusha creates the universe is called Prakriti or nature. The active aspect of the Brahman, which is all consciousness, awareness. The consciousness manifested itself in the form of the universe, ruled by the three gunas, and their sway. The original soul, the universal spirit, altered its appearance, meaning it became the cause as well as the effect, the seer as well as the seen, the doer as well as the deed.
What is Chidabhasa and how does it affect our lives? Suppose that we have a dark shuttered room. It is so dark that we are unable to find anything inside it. We are only able to open the door, and although there is bright sunlight outside, this does not penetrate far enough to illuminate the interior. Say for instance, we have a mirror. By positioning ourselves in the doorway, we could hold the mirror at such an angle that the sunlight reflects in the mirror and illuminates the contents of the room. Although the mirror is itself inert, having no light of its own, it becomes the source of light by virtue of reflecting the light from the sun. This, of course, is also how we get the moonlight by which we can see during the night. When there is a moon in the cloudless sky, the light of the moon is simply reflected light of the sun. The parallel can now be made with our own inert equipments and consciousness. Atman or the self is the equivalent of the sun and only true source of consciousness. Atman illuminates the instrument of the mind, which itself is not a source of consciousness. But by virtue of this illumination, the mind is able to reflect the consciousness via the senses into the room of the world and become aware of the objects therein and interact with them, including the body-mind itself. This reflection of the Atman, the universal self, on or through the mind, ordinarily this term is used to denote the reflected universal self in the jiva, the individual self. It's considered adequate whenever we feel empathetic towards others and participate in other people's joys and sorrows. But when we go beyond thoughts of human sufferings and sorrows, then that is considered high-minded and the greatest of great virtues in spiritual speak. The devotion of such virtuous high-mindedness has a very strong favor from God's frame of reference. This high-minded virtuousness are great propellers for an aspiring student in spirituality. Just as a sprout buds into a blossom and then into a bloom, in a similar way, the aspiring student becomes devotional due to moving beyond thoughts of worldly nature and into thoughts relating to Paramatma or universal consciousness. The mind, in the process of becoming virtuous, starts feeling satisfied and delightful. The devotion helps us to move to our path of enlightenment. enlightenment, and it would give us a realization once the mind becomes rarefied that I am Brahmin myself or Aham Brahmasmi. This is a definite and a given to a student of spirituality. The main hindrances for a student of spirituality is himself. If his Chidabhasa is totally dark, it's like an example where the door the light shines from is closed, so there is no scope for the mirror to get its reflected light to shine lights on the objects in the room, as I discussed in the above example in the opening. Once the Chidabhasa gets immersed into darkness, sorrows and miseries just engulf the individual. So you see, people have unending bouts of tribulations and they cannot escape those situations. Chidabhasa means light, even though reflected, is still light. If there is darkness in the light itself, you could imagine the destiny of an individual wouldn't let him be. The Chidabhasa turning to darkness doesn't mean that doesn't affect the wealthy. There are a lot of wealthy people on the planet whose Chidabhasa is totally immersed into darkness. So you may think or link wealthy to a bright Chidabhasa, which is not generally true. As I explained in my Buddha's story about the beggar with a touchstone, I will link it above. The beggar was ridden with a darkened Chidabhasa. Hence, he couldn't even decipher the words of wisdom that Buddha was trying to preach to him. The Chidabhasa lights up the modifications of the psychological instruments in the form of I, as well as its ramifications such as desire, anger, and so on. As a fire can heat up an iron ball, just as a red hot iron ball can illumine itself but does not illuminate other objects, so do the psychoses within illumine themselves. Being enlightened by the Chidabhasa but not directly illumine other objects. These psychoses within come in a series as bits of a process with intervals between the different links of the process and do not flow continuously. Also, they get dissolved in sleep and samadhi state or super consciousness. How does the darkening of Chidabhasa take place? The Atma is so bright that we could be blinded by its exuberance and it could never be modified by any modifications in nature. But due to the karmas of the individual, the Atma gets clouded by dark curtains on its outer side, forming layers of dark clouds. So the individual ends up not getting light from his or her own Atma. And as per the example above, the individual gets a room or a world with no light in it. What it means is that the person is unable to identify with what is really true, and the person would have rogue-like qualities and could never have a peaceful mind and would always feel uneasy. He would easily conquer qualities and emotions like annoyance, anger, irritation, rage, and fury. He moves far away from a calm and peaceful mind. Since fear and anger or annoyance move hand in hand, if you get annoyed easily, then your basal emotion is that of fear. So individuals whose Chidabhasa is immersed into darkness, let alone leading a calm and peaceful life, the person turns in more wicked and mischievous. The path for such an individual to attain even simple moments of joy would be a stretch. Their lives are riddled with misfortunes, disasters, catastrophes, and tragedies. The life itself has a hellish feel, but the death is not easier as well. Death would be a struggle for such people. The path to devotion for such an individual is like climbing a mountain whose summit never attains. The individuals with such a makeup are here to do more wrongs than right their prior wrongs. The path to misdeeds is a given. The darkness clouding of the Atma is the makeup of such a person is God's arrangement. At the time of death, the Atma starts to agonize such an individual by giving them various diseases and afflictions. He or she is unable to sleep as the misdeeds of the life start to backfire on the person, and he or she is unable to live with the emotional backfire. This is all relayed to the person through their conscience. So even though you have all the wealth, family and lavish life, still the Chidabhasa could be immersed into darkness. He or she could be intelligent too. The tendency to consume alcohol and promiscuity are all indications of a darkened Chidabhasa. A bright Chidabhasa would never have such tendencies. What are the qualities of a bright Chidabhasa? A bright Chidabhasa would make a person sattvic. They would be mentally well balanced, calm and peaceful. Even though karmas would be applicable to them as per their prior life, but the impact of such karmas won't affect the functioning of their current life. The people easily complete their education, and once they complete their education, they have several job offers waiting for them. They grow in their jobs and they get quick promotions, and also they don't have to worry about finding a spouse. A very suitable partner is set up for such people, and their married life is very pleasant. Their partners also do not interfere in their day-to-day lives. Their acceptance and understanding is implicit. All in all, life becomes enjoyable and every living moment will be purposeful, fruitful and productive. How would I be able to walk my Chidabhasa from darkness into light? The mind of a man has the final say whether you could be able to walk from darkness to light or the other way around. The mind can make it or break it for the person. As the intelligence layer is closest to the Atma, the Jiva needs to make a constant effort and understand its shortcomings and try to discipline himself or herself to move out from the habitual established patterns of misdeeds and chart out a new path to move away from eccentric behaviors. The Guru is instrumental in this aspect, as the master directly commands the conscience of the disciple and can make changes to the direction of their life as they see fit. There are other ways: by recitation of the mantra given by the Guru, by singing hymns in praise of Paramatma, and stronger modes are by following a practice of meditation. The student of spirituality can move towards light. Once the disciple becomes steady in their practices, then their tendencies to stray would be curbed automatically and he would slowly and steadily move towards light. There will be a marked difference in their life compared to the past experiences, and the individual then enjoys a harmonious, soothing, undisturbed and untroubled existence. Do you have a calm and peaceful life, or are you agitated or angered easily? Please do let me know in the comment section below. The mind, the subtle body and the forging of the path to realization. When a man says there is no God, it's pretty funny because it's due to the Atma only that he is able to say that. It's only their destiny. If another man is mistaken or ignorant, we should try to improve our understanding and not come to quick conclusions and be more sophisticated, and this sophistication can only happen through devotion. Our observation becomes optimistic, productive, constructive and upbeat due to devotion. The reason for this is in the five senses: eyes, nose, ear, tongue and skin, which results in sight, smell, hearing, taste and touch respectively. These are the outcomes of the karma related senses that provide information to the knowledge sense or the Jnana Indriyas. Due to the outcome of the senses, we are able to know about the objective world around us. Mind applies options and comes to resolutions, and the identification and cognition happens in the intelligence or the buddhi of the person. And as we discussed in our previous videos, the intelligence is ahead of the mind from the body or the kosha standpoint. I will provide you a link to it so that you can view it. The mind is in charge of the options and resolutions, and also ignorance as well as anger and other imaginative aspects. The intelligence is actually at work, and the procession of pride that comes out of the mind is called the ego. The heart of the emotional mind is called the chitta. The analysis of all the thoughts that happen in the mind, this emotional aspect of the mind or the chitta allows for subjectivity. For example, if a bitter taste affects one negatively, then one's perception of a bitter tasting fruit would be negative. So there are four compartments of the mind: the ego, intelligence, emotion
and thought generation. Even though they are separate, they are still one. But still, there is another aspect of the waves of disturbance of the mind. The person could be irritated, and as a result of these waves of disturbance, a person could be forgiving and another would want vengeance. These waves result in the fruits at a point in time. Those are the karmas of the person. These waves could cause a person to have either a positive or a negative experience. The mind or the manas. The manas is the part of the mind that we typically think about when we hear the word mind. This is the emotional mind and at times may be irrational. One of the main distinctions of the manas is how quickly it stamps things as like or dislike. Our mind does things so quickly, sometimes we don't even catch it. I like those shoes, or it smells bad there. And this is the chitta vritti, the intellect or the buddhi. The buddhi is similar to the word Buddha and it is the rational mind. This is a wise part of the mind that gives us awareness. The verbal root Bud means to awaken. So our wise intellect is able to think back on our experiences, relate to experiences and the people around you, and is always guiding our next move. The ego or the ahankara. Sometimes the word ego gets a bad rap, but the part of the mind that we associate with ahankara is our sense of individuality. Of course, in healthy doses. We need aspects of the ahankara for happiness and our personality, or else we would be depressed. We would feel lost without the sense of the I. When this part of the mind is unobserved, it can run on competitiveness and constantly comparing itself to others. Having the awareness is the first part of the healthy and balanced ahankara or ego. The unconscious mind or the chitta. The chitta is sometimes also referred to as the storehouse of emotions. You may also see it referred to as the heart of emotions. This is where all our experiences, memories and impressions or samskaras are stored. Many times we have unprocessed or undigested emotions in this part of the mind, and they may strive for our attention in various ways. The way we react to situations may be one of them, or the way we cope up with stress may be another. Collectively, the mind works quickly and beautifully, fusing all these different parts in each and every scenario we are in. Stay tuned till the end, and also please don't forget to like, share and subscribe to my channel. The mind is the instrument of perception. The mind is created by the imbalance of the three gunas. The three gunas are in constant state of struggle to attain supremacy. This imbalance is reflected in the constantly swirling human mind. The swirling is the karma that we, the Atma, experience for the time of our human life. Unable to bear the imbalance, the mind constantly seeks a middle ground in which it does not feel the impact of the pulls and pushes of the opposites. The mind cannot lose the pulls of the temptation, strays from the middle ground and faces consequent backlashes. In turning to various alternatives for peace, tranquility and freedom, which is the true nature of the Atman, it comes across the teachings of the Paramatma, which is self-realization through devotion. The mind learns that it does not have to turn anywhere except to itself to find the answer and quell the turmoil within. One by one, it sheds the illusion and attachments that it was subject to. It then attains unification with the Atma and is freed forever from the repeated cycles of births and deaths. The mind is created by the imbalance of these three gunas. If the sattva is more, the person will have a calm and composed personality. If Rajas is more, then it goes to a more unstable personality. As in Rajas, there may be a constant feeling of hostility towards someone or something. The Rajas Guna person is always restless, and a mind with Rajas Guna would be a tough nut to crack in spirituality. Tamas Guna is further down the river from Rajas, and it takes a man to his or her own destruction. So we have 5 knowledge senses or indriyas, which are the ears, skin, eyes, tongue, nose, and we have 5 action senses or karma indriyas or voice, hand, feet, anus and genitalia, and then 5 elements, which is the earth, water, fire, air and space, and 5 life forces or pranas, which are collectively known as 5 winds, prana, which helps in talking, laughing, singing, dancing, fighting, etc. Apana or downward breath lets food and drink enter the body and move waste down and out of the body. Udana or upward breath, which helps in sneezing, hiccuping, vomiting and coughing. Vyana, which gives goosebumps, sweating, stomach pain, bending of the limbs and the sense of touch. And Samana, which mixes the eaten and the drunk. And the mind with its 4 compartments as I described before. The surprising 6th aspect is the ignorance, which engulfs every living being. In order to destroy it, we need knowledge to cross the ignorance barrier. It is due to this ignorance that man does not know God, and no person is able to know his or her own Atma due to this ignorance. The 7th one is desire. These are our cravings, just as we like to be rich and acquire material possessions in our lives. If we were not to desire, we would still have been cavemen. Due to desires, progress happens and we get kings and rulers. In their own sense, they are the cause of progress of man. They are not bad in themselves, but the desires that generate attachments and that engulfs the jiva are bad. It's due to the selfish motives of the person. And the last one is karma. The dullness or lethargy could also be karma. Without the execution of karma, there is no freedom, even for birds and animals, as they have to do their karma in order to gather the food by themselves. Hence, every being is bound to its own karmas. And as a part of reincarnation, a topic that I discussed in my prior video, I will link it above. All the 8 entities described above are cause of our subtle body. Hence, it is called 8-limbed or Ashtanga. The subtle layer is the next to the gross form of the individual, and it's been born of the Mahabhutas or the 5 elements, which are earth, water, fire, air and space. Since all these are part of the subtle body, all that is going on is part of the subtle layer, and the gross form is just the fructification of those subtle desires. For example, if I suddenly have a desire to have my favorite food, the desire springs out from the subtle layer, and once the taste is registered by the tongue, the gross layer then pings information of the record, and this is the food that has been had, and based on the experiences, Buddhi tries to make comparisons with the past to make the resulting outcomes, although not the cause to path of realization. But forging is in the subtle body, and it's hard for a disciple to grasp. As the subtle body progresses, then the disciple has a chance to get to his soul or his or her own Atma. The light of the Chidabhasa, if is not visible to the individual upon meditative practice, it means that the subtle body is blocking the reflection of the light that the Atma is reflecting. So, the forging and the forger is itself the subtle body, and it is the central point of the path to realization. The gross form of the man is of blood and bones, is mortal and decaying. The subtle layer doesn't get destroyed, but the gross body doesn't contain desires. This the man doesn't know. The desire to eat your favorite ice cream starts in the subtle body, and the eyes that look at the ice cream ad are the senses that help the subtle body to fulfill the desires. So the desires spring out of the subtle body and not the gross body. If I feel like drinking alcohol, it comes from the subtle body. Say, for example, if a person A slaps a person B, the subtle inclination of the person provokes him to use his gross limbs and go off to strike person B. So the part where the person A is hitting person B is affecting both person A and person B's subtle bodies. The Jivatma is different from both the gross and the subtle body. There is a confusion about this. The gross body is mortal and it sleeps, eats, talks, etc. and it is a vehicle for the Jivatma and not for the subtle body. Similar to the example of electricity, the mortal body is powered by the Atma. The people could either get drunk or acquire knowledge under it, which means that the Atma is totally aloof and is just watching the Jiva perform its karmas, good or bad. The gross body sometimes starts to glow in yogis, just like for example Sai Baba, it's due to the Atma, which is internally God's rays through the Atma that illuminate the gross body. The light of the Atma pierces the gross form in such yogis and it gets seen as rays, and these rays help other humans get rid of diseases. The gross body is the means for the subtle body to fulfill its desires. The main central body of focus is therefore the subtle body. It's available to the person in his or her waking state, but when the body is in deep sleep, the subtle body is not functioning. The mind and the intelligence are also asleep at the time. The person does not know if he is dead or alive, and at this point he is unaware of the gross world that he experiences during waking. This deep sleep state happens only for 2 or 3 hours in a day. This is where the causal body, which is part of the mental body, comes into play, and once the causal body awakens, it brings about transitory happiness and it brings about appearance of restful sleep to the person. The whole world runs on the subtle body due to the resulting actions it produces through its vehicle, the gross body, and both these are vehicles of the Jivatma. The Jivatma, if required, is controlled by the Atma. I mention if required as the Jivatma is free to do its karmas. So, say for example a person has emotions of anger or sadness, the Atma or the soul has nothing to do with it. It's unblemished and not connected to the emotions that the subtle body so desires. The Atma is the observer of all bodies. It may mean that it's been qualified as having an attribute, but its attributes are beyond the comprehension and it's beyond the 3 gunas as I described before. The 3 gunas are inconvenience to the Jivatma. The Jivatma uses the subtle body to be the cause of desires. The desires are created in the subtle body as the mind, intelligence, etc. all are right there in the subtle body. The Jivatma finally is you only, the person desiring that things would be alright, or maybe I could get that nice car, or I could go out of station this weekend. The journey of the Jivatma is to reach to his or her own Atma. That's the truth. But the reflection of the Atma is the Jivatma. The emotions like for example anger, rage, fury, annoyance, displeasure are all parts of the subtle body. The journey of the Jivatma is to sit with his or her own eyes closed and then bring a mastery on these desires. As the Atma is aloof from the scene and as it is the silent observer of the scene, even when the person is performing misdeeds, the Atma is just watching and it would never intervene at a later point when the Jiva demands justice for that particular situation. It is a silent observer at all times. A meditative practice is therefore definitely required for you to experience your subtle body and to enter it, and there is definite need to close our eyes as it's viewing the gross world, and as long as you don't close your eyes, it is not possible to directly experience the subtle world. For the aspirant of spirituality, the subtle layer has dark clouds of desires, thoughts, longings, cravings, all that the mind has gathered through its prior impressions or samskaras is all present in the subtle body, and since it is subtle, it can't be seen, and it's the truth that the body goes with the death of the person. It keeps attaching to the soul and it comes back with the impressions from reincarnations. Due to meditation, the mind is then able to focus, and the thoughts that are mainly linked to desires, these thoughts subside and the mind becomes concentrated, and constantly desiring subtle body also fades in the process and starts to relieve itself of the shallow and superficial thoughts, and then the subtle mind gets more deeper and deeper into thoughts of itself and the Atma. It is in this process the Jiva starts imbibing attributes of the Atma and starts to become aloof and sees itself at a distance from the gross world, still being there involved and doing things but without attachments. As the gunas affect the person at this level, the gunas start leaning towards the sattvic nature and the person enjoys a tranquil, peaceful, soothing and relaxing existence. Man doesn't know what is his or her life's meaning and what really his life is all about. So he has numerable errors in his behavior due to ignorance. If he or she has an idea about his or her future life, they could at least be a lot sober in their behavior. We have to face the consequences of our own karmas, as the past and the future lives of the person are obscured by the veil of ignorance. So the person is careless in his or her present behavior. In this video, we will take a look into how the past life karmas affect the person and how could a person with a bleak future change his outlook to a promising and hopeful one. The person is careless about his or her Atma and never pays attention to his inner being. The power that runs nature, that ultimate power, is totally ignored and forgotten by man. Definitely he would remember, but only due to his selfishness and for the completion of his own desires does he remember God. This selfish devotion can get a person nowhere in his spiritual journey. Every person's devotion is selfish. It only turns selfless in the presence of a true guru. Until then, it's just an outward appearance and it goes nowhere. The birth of the person itself intends him toward selfishness. Selfishness is part of his or her bodily existence. God's existence is never known by such a selfish man. If man knew about the journey of the Atma beyond death, man would never dare to even shout or be angered at another person. Every eccentric behavior is watched by the Atma and every voice raised commits a sin from the Atma's point of view. These behaviors are taken up very seriously in the person's path to realization. The reason to this is that causing pain to another person and hurting another person's mind is a very serious problem. As the pain and hurt is not visible to the person committing those acts, that's why the person's existence is really shallow and superficial, and God watches such people silently just as a witness to their acts. Everyone is bound to the fruits of their karmas. The man doesn't have spiritual vision at all. The plans that he executes is of the income that he could make in the objective world that he or she lives in. Some try businesses and some try employment. Some try to get promotions in their workplace. Some plan for marriages and correspondingly try for children from their planned marriages. These are all unwanted thoughts of worldly nature. It's not that these are not needed, but the bottom line of this is that these thoughts are always impure, and since they are impure, man himself is impure due to this reason. Man is able to keep his surroundings and body clean, but the thoughts are what he is specifically supposed to clean in a real sense. The karmas also apply to the individual due to reincarnation and evolution of the soul. These karmas keep accumulating every now and then on the person's account. The fruits of these karmas are continuously being brought about by the individual in his current life and that he is living in. The account is being kept by the Atma or the soul of the person. This the person doesn't know. In society, you get to meet different kinds of people. If you see a highly affluent person, you start to feel jealous about the person. We think that he is happy in his life since there is a superficial misconception that money buys happiness. Every person is subject to their own worries, anxieties and disturbances. Because as long as the mind doesn't become loving and silent, it still remains in ignorance of the truth. The thoughts of other people, when they come to a stop, the ego gets destroyed and the existence of such person then goes beyond and apart from others. This is due to the reason of the past life devotion of the person. The past life karmas are never known to a normal man. This is his difficulty. The current life karmas are already taking place, and the time at which these karmas are taking place, the person doesn't have any control on his actions such as anger, actions such as greed, actions such as jealousy, and actions such as spite. The reason of this is due to the tamasic nature of the person, which inspires him to do such wrongs. A chain of such series of all such happenings is prepared, and when one raises their voice on another, then the calculations of these offenses are immediately changed. The person then starts becoming rough and fierce in their dealings. The serious impact of such happenings happen on the mind of the person. It then leads to the darkening of the next life of the person, and he has to bear all the consequences of those offenses. The person has to face major adversities and inconveniences from his or her birth itself, and the Atma doesn't create these. The man goes to God to get rid of these adversities and inconveniences. Every man is mistaken in this aspect, that whatever life or fate that person is facing is never known to man, that it was due to the beats of his or her own actions of their past life regressions. This is the reason they then go to astrologers to find out whether their life or adversities could turn around. But man doesn't know that fate itself is karma. He thinks that something will turn around accidentally, and so he eagerly waits for his luck to turn. Our own inert equipment is run by Atma or God, and that is the only truth. So the excessive erroneous karmas bear fruits and they result in a cursed and an ugly life. And it's only due to the offenses committed by man. A diseased body is also a result of such offenses. If the karmas are good, then the body is healthy, fit and sound. When the body has to face grave illnesses like pneumonia, typhoid, etc., then the past life offenses or karmas of the person are then fruitioned. These diseases are fruitioned only due to the resolution of the karma on the gross body of the individual. So man is really blindsided to the nature of God from an early age, and the mistakes and faults in his karmas from that age are adverse, and the calculations of such karmas start going negative by the time the person reaches his or her adulthood. Everyone's existence is part of positives and negatives of karma that get materialized. When the karmas are in negative territory, it leads to the destruction of the person. Such persons' minds are weak and they have no morale to show in fierce situation, and the person thinks as to why these incidents have to only happen to them. Take for instance of a business where people may think that the person running their business is earning a lot of money and cash flows through their business, but in fact many businesses close down and many get into loans that they are unable to repay, leading to a plight of the person that earlier set out to make it big in their life. Earning income is just a measure of a person in the objective world. The real measure of the jiva is inside, and this the person never knows due to the person never experiencing peace and tranquility of his or her own self, and the troubles and difficulties are the only things that he or she remembers on a daily basis. The person also doesn't have control over his or her own desires, and these desires are intense and fierce, and devotion and dedication in such person is very dim and muted. The ego of such persons is attenuated, due to which the mind swirls and cracks in tough situations, cause the procession of me, myself of the ego has been marching out of the individual self, and around which all the koshas reside. The person has no regard for his or her own atma. Only in calamities and adversities does man look for an image of God or tries to visualize God. In his or her own normal life, he is happy outwardly, but on the inside he has a different feeling. He is bleak and cheerless. There is an unknown fear that is continuously existing in his mind. Those are the offenses that the person has committed in the past life. The unknown fear is bad and messy. It torments and harasses the person. Every person has an unknown fear. The fear casts a contrary shadow on the person's mind, and the jivatma is totally fearing his life due to these fears. In a general sense, life is beautiful and melodious, and the man shouldn't be very attached to his life, but he or she should love their own life. Not speaking of attachments and bondings in armchair speculation, but due to fear, the man very much lacks self-confidence due to the fear that exists in his or her own mind. And when we are able to face our calamities head on, and we can consider ourselves to have some kind of better existence, else man thinks it's better to end his or her own life. These sour experiences that man has to face in the creation of knots of his or her own karmas, these knots sometimes end up as a noose around the person, creating a suffocating existence. Existence is like a boundless flow of ocean of peace and happiness. The man's attention is never towards this boundless flow of peace and tranquility, as he is searching for happiness in the outer world world, and he has a frustration towards the rich and wealthy folks. The rich have problems of their own in the sense that they are always on the hook to remain affluent. The middle class are mainly there to talk about other middle class people, and there is no peace in all the three classes of society. The only peace available to the person is through his or her own penance. It is a bestowal upon the jiva when the mind is unwavering and fortified. He or she then doesn't get excited so easily. Their minds don't take hasty decisions. This is peace. Negative feelings don't occur in such a person. The reason is due to the dependence on the soul and God and his true love for God. When it is not present, the life is withered and shriveled. And when his or her skin starts baking, then he starts to remember God. The Atma or God, due to being formless, is not visible to anyone. It doesn't talk, so the man searches for a guru, and then commercial gurus come up into existence. The gurus that instill fear into the disciple and they extort money from them. The man is also literally helpless in this matter. He is so afraid that he cannot bear the slightest of adversities. Even a bit of adversity is rejected by him. His expectation is of endless contentment, and to such a person, sufferings mount and literally set him ablaze. As an example, when anyone in your home is suffering from an ailment or a malady, the environment of the home is also ruined with the plight. This is due to the fact that man is scared of himself and not of the ailment. He thinks that he shouldn't face that ailment in the future. This fear torments him and his mind. Other than going inwards towards his or her own Atma, the person has no other option. If you need true contentment in your life, you have to be dedicated and be devotional towards your own soul or Atma. The dedication should show in your conduct and behavior, and you should be truthful from the point of view of God. There shouldn't be a trace of false pretenses within you. Jivatma is no one compared to God. If we shout at another person, God wouldn't like it, and as He is inside you, viewing the gross form of the body in an unbiased way. In every life, there are penalties of the karmas to be paid in the current life, and there are consequent temporary arrangement of penalties that are applied immediately in the present life too. The past life penalties for karmas is more deeper topic from the viewpoint of the Jivatma. The Atma tries to give a warning to the Jiva as to the comeuppance of substantial penalties to the jiva through such temporary penalty arrangements. For example, a person might be thrown down from a moving two-wheeler, and the man may think that the road might have been too slippery. So how does the slipping occur? These are the arrangements of the Atma. The Atma is executing the orders of the Paramatma or God on the Jivatma. Another example around this is of a person who cursed Jesus Christ. The formless God is just watching the person, and it twisted his ankle, and it was not because of the cursing of Jesus Christ. It was a lesson for being rude and defiant. The person was defiant, stating, "Who could harm me?" And Jesus Christ didn't feel anything about him saying anything, but the feelings of the person were very bad. Hence the Atma gave the person a quick peek at what justice could look like. Man, by saying he is virtuous and merciful, forgiving and a good man, can impress foolish people around him or her. He is just expressing certain viewpoints that mean nothing, and he cannot impress God by such dialogues. Life is far more critical. Every Jivatma is uneducated in the field of spirituality. His doctorates and PhDs are of no consequence to the Atma. The Atma is formless and boundless, is viewing you impartially every split moment of your life. Your most private, confidential life is known to the Atma. The best part of this is that the Atma knows it before the event unfolds. Every moment, the intelligence or the buddhi that comes into play in a person that torments another being later finds the man in a lot of sorrows and tribulations. As an example, the boss keeps tormenting an employee repeatedly. This is a punishment. These are the fruits that are associated with the fortune of the person. When the person has mafias on his tail, this is an arrangement by the Atma or God. These are pawns for the Atma to move and checkmate the Jiva. The creator of condrays is not God, but if the conduct is bad, the condrays are ready for the Jiva. Then the Jiva has to scratch his head and find out ways and means to get out of those quandaries. Such a predicament arises in the office that is a penalty for being egoistic. The ego should be withdrawn and should fade. The ego is itself the jiva, and as long as it's not withdrawn or faded to the backgrounds, the person won't be able to turn back to the Atma. The person's journey won't begin to his or her own inner self once he takes care of the me and the ego that springs out of the selfish me. If the person states that he doesn't have an ego, then how could he have taken a birth in this life? The person is definitely dishonest. When the ego of such a person starts to mount, the person becomes demonic. The demons that you have to face are not outside, they are from your own self. How does a man's life start treading to the downward path suddenly? Why does a person suddenly slip and fall? Why does the mind suddenly collapse? Let not the mind fall and drop. Let the peaceful life enter into you and let it bring peace and harmony into your life. The life of true devotion can survive calamities and face various maladies of the body and mind. Even a small nudge in the right direction towards yourself is better in fighting against your demons. The waves of happiness and sorrows isn't brought in by God into man's life. It's the man's behavior that gets him those happiness and sorrows. He definitely remembers the sorrows of the past, but he easily forgets the happinesses. As an example, the mind sinks when it gets to know if there is a surgery about to take place on the body. But if the individual is devoted to God, they could be able to stand to any kind of adversity it is put through. Even a small inclination towards devotion and dedication could be enough to face calamities of life. Without devotion, the mind isn't able to recap or recall any of the moments of joy, but it remembers the insults and taunts that other people hurled its way. He or she remembers the harassments and torments that he faced, and he definitely doesn't remember the help that he or she received at times. Say for example, person A helps person B 10 times, and then on the 11th time, if the person A complains about person B, then the person B remembers only the 11th interaction and the prior 10 interactions are totally wiped out from the person B's mind. This is the nature of the individual. Such kind of perverted mentality is held by people in general. It is ingrained and habituated within the individual to remember negative things and not see the positive aspect of things. The mind has been molded by the jiva only. A weak mind only reverts back to the individual that can feel other taunts and their torments. Such a mind is totally absorbed into emotions. For a person that has crossed their emotional mind, such insults would feel like sweet honey and they would be unfazed by such talk. Such minds have won over their emotions. The core of duality is that each person thinks they are different from the rest and that they are the center of the whole world, and the whole world terminates to their central point of focus. The mind therefore needs to be empowered to get away from such delusional bearings. When the mind is weak, then it pays attention to what other people think or say. Man is after all a man, and he behaves in certain ways at certain times. He may love another person and sometimes loathe them due to his own presumptions. He has no control over his emotions. His perspective about the world keeps changing by the minute. The man has shades of positives and negatives, and the negatives are really disgrace to the man. The negatives are deadly as well to the individual. As poison and nectar cannot go hand in hand, the individual who has a major task of crossing the 5 koshas is stuck up in these perversions. Leaving crossing the koshas aside, could the individual just try cleansing his mind of the perversions that he or she has lived with all their lives for a change? So many demonic emotions are dancing in the individual's mind, and the anger that goes uncontrolled in his mind, the individual has to deeply study this. Once the individual has controlled expression of emotions of anger, then there is some kind of start to the journey to move inwards. He cannot rid himself of the attachments of the world. A mind drowned in attachment and bondages is restless. Even though there is peace for brief moments, this peace is transient. Everlasting peace is the only truth, in the sense that whatever narrative plays in the mind isn't distracted by it. If the mind is devotional, then happiness overflows through such minds. There is no doubt in such a mind. For example, Sai Baba had full confidence that God would come to his aid, and never in a moment did he have a doubt on this. Doubt only enters the jiva's mind, and the doubts are not superficial, but those doubts are deep-rooted, and these deep-rooted doubts grip the person and take him or her to their own destruction. The bright Atma, the Atma's contentment factor of existence, it's only its brilliance. When mind starts to journey towards the Atma, then the individual starts to get pulled by its brilliance and exuberance. He moves from a transient to everlasting peace. Because the Atma is only only the truth. After death, the individual that dies immediately comes to know the truth. But the life after death is unknown to the Jiva, and the Jiva is not acquainted with the experience of death, barring a few rare experiences. The truth happens by closing your eyes, being in a meditative state, and then the dialogue starts between the Jiva and the Atma. The knowledge then flows through such an entity. The Atma will also help the individual even in finer aspects of life. The Atma would start to help out fondly, and Atma knows the three Gunas, unlike the human mind that swirls within its midst. The fact that man is ignorant is true, but once the Atma is friendly with him, the sudden events of his life that are then acceptable to him, and the Atma takes care of all the following events that occur in the Jiva's life. But when the individual boots another person, this the Atma generally doesn't appreciate of the Jiva, because if I am Brahma, does that mean the others are animals or donkeys? Do you think that you are only part of God? Every creation is part of God. Only the mind that is so tender is unable to fathom creation at that level. Man states that his life is so miserable, he has to live and breathe between other people's karmas. Only one person is enough to bring about disturbance and annoyance in other people's lives. A virtuous person can help about bringing peacefulness in an environment. This is the main point to focus on. It's about trying to terminate the bad karmas before they can come into existence. A person has the ability to break off bad karmas due to one virtuous person in the household. The people in the household can become content. The virtuousness is such that even if there is a planned accident for the virtuous person, the Atma is able to intervene and bring about a different result than what was originally planned. An instance comes to my mind regarding this. There was once a fire in an aircraft, and there was a devotee of Swami Samarth, and the aircraft didn't catch fire due to the devotee being in it. The devotee got off the New Zealand airport, and when he got off, the aircraft went ablaze. Prior to the landing itself, the aircraft engine started to fail in the air. The saints, with the help of God, are able to intervene such accidents, and they could do it for their true devotees. The example described is just God's play. If in your household just one person can start their inward journey, it's not possible for other people to be kept under control. At an individual level, each person is responsible for his or her own actions. The man, instead of turning inwards, is doing unnecessary gathering up of emotions. The life of such a person is squandered, and by the time the individual comes to know about it, the mind would have already been wilted or parched. It's a sad outcome for such a person's life. Man also says he is too busy and has no time for meditation, and falls sick and has to leave all his daily life, and then he has to check into hospitals and get treatments and quietly face the tortures of his life. At that time, he doesn't say he is busy with his life. Due to the sins and offenses one commits, his or her life flows in that particular direction. As an example, some people get salary credited into their account on a timely basis. Others won't even get a salary for years together. That's the karmas of the person playing out in real time. The sins that a man commits keeps him from earning his wages, and once the money starts to flow in, that causes sins to be committed. Man does a lot of nonsensical activities when he starts getting money in his pocket. It is surprising to note this point. Due to the money, he starts getting attached to pleasures and enjoyment. Youngsters of affluent parentage get spoiled as a result. The youngsters of poverty-stricken background also get spoiled due to not having enough, and then they end up stealing. They are helpless and have to beg for food. Man, if his behavior is not balanced, if he is poor or rich, life is still full of God. The body is full of desires and wants, and the subtle body has ripples or waves of unwanted desires floating on its surface. A pure person is only the one who is calm and peaceful and knows his or her own Atma. The man whose mind is in control is God. The man whose wants are in control is God. The man who has mastery over his senses is God, and he is the gross form of God. The gross form never gets old, the body never gets tired. The man doesn't know his future, that is true. He doesn't know time, that is also true. But
if in the current, if the mind is not enriched or enhanced, it will come back to bite him in the future. It may strike back in different forms. Egoistic people are available in society, and this is our worldly reflection. As you listen to this, your journey may be different. Your journey should be the one that turns towards the Atma, and that everyone could turn toward their Atma is not guaranteed. As our minds are possessed by unwanted thoughts and emotion, this restless mind calms down in the company of the Atma. With the Atma, the mind will blossom in its presence. There are a lot of expectations of people. God won't fulfill those expectations. All that God can give you is a savor of peace, and the Atma will send His unforeseen help in your time of need. But before that, you need to help yourself. You need to understand that you are a Jivatma. You are far away from your own indivisible Atma or soul. If at all that gap or distance of separation of distance between the Jiva and Atma shortens, then the mind would turn bright and then into brilliance, and that only is the inner peace, contentment and fulfillment. Nobody wants to be a sinner, but all the same, we keep transgressing the bounds of morality and disobey the divine law. We wish to enjoy the fruits of virtue without being morally good and without doing anything meritorious. In this video, we will take a look into sins and virtues and how they go hand in hand for the Jiva, and how the Jiva could take necessary steps to make his life virtuous. Arjuna asks Krishna, "No man can commit sin. Even so, Krishna, he does the evil again and again. What is it that drives him so?" The Lord replies, "It is desire." Yes, it is desire, Arjuna. We try to gain the object of our desire with no thought of right or wrong. Is fire put out by oil poured into it? No, it rises higher and higher. Likewise, when we gratify one desire, another, which is much worse, crops up. Are we to take it then that it would be better if our desires were not satisfied at all? No. Unfulfilled desire causes anger. We hanker after. Like a rubber ball thrown against the wall, such an unsatisfied desire comes back to us in the form of anger and goads us into committing sin. Krishna speaks of such anger as being next only to desire. Only by banishing desire from our hearts may we be free from sin. How is it done? We cannot but be performing our works. Even when we are physically inactive, our mind is always active. All our mental and bodily activity revolves around the desires, and these desires thrust us deeper and deeper into sin. Is it then possible to remain without doing any karmas? Human nature being what it is, the answer is no. It is difficult to quell one's thinking, nor is it easy to remain without doing anything. We may stop doing work with the body, but how do we keep our minds quiet? The mind is never still. Apart from being still, it actually incites the body into action. We are unable either to efface our desire or cease from all action. Does it then mean that liberation is beyond us? Is there no way out of the problem? Yes, there is. It's not necessary that we should altogether stop our actions in our present immature predicament. But instead of working for our selfish ends, we ought to be engaged in such work as would bring benefits to the world as well as to our inward life. The more we are involved in such work and less we are drawn by desire, this will to some extent keep us away from sin and at the same time enable us to do meritorious work. We must learn the habit of doing work without any selfish motives. Work done without any desire for fruit, therefore, is virtuous action. Life tests the integrity of all of us very severely by throwing us into unpleasant situations. These tests occur right through our lives. While almost everyone starts out on the right track, very few manage to stay out of troubled waters and on the right course of our lives. The fundamental requirement of an individual is to keep away from sins and avoid a life of temptations offered by the world. Typically, attempts to take what does not belong to one is primary modus operandi of sin. Virtue is earned primarily by selfless service and by spreading the message of God. The proposition is that sin increases the chances of rebirth, and the extent of sin determines the hurdles in which the individual will be subjected to a next birth. Given the importance of staying on the good side of sin and virtue, an undertone of most of the scriptures emphasize the importance of not falling prey to worldly temptations. Man thinks that the actioned karmas of the past are past and the past is done, and this time it is different for him. And the fact is that in the past life he is the same person as he is now. That's why the penalties are for his own karmas. He or she is not different now. The important thing is that in his inert equipment some changes could be brought out by the master, but it mostly doesn't happen until the meeting of the Guru. Man's mind is generally tamasic and has dark qualities to it. Demonic qualities then are ready to take over the person. Demonic qualities like anger, jealousy, hatred, greed and temptation. And from these demonic emotions, the man needs to inspire himself to rescue his mind. The man does not know this. The soul, which is the witness, is watching the jiva commit all the karmas. It also brings about resolution to prior karmas. So, if the being has any kind of ailment, it is the result of his or her own past karmas. This the person generally ignores. If a student doesn't behave like a student, he gets penalized for such a behavior. A student of any stream should worship the area of study that he is involved with. If the student wastes the opportunity provided to him, then the Atma penalizes him at a later stage and he gets into a troubled state in the future. Man, due to his ego, behaves badly, as the ego is a magnet for all emotions, in the sense that the ego is instrumental in angering a person. It is instrumental in piquing desires in a person. It also holds grudges and is instrumental in making the person greedy, arrogant, and in raising the temptations of the person. The basal reason for this is the aham or the I of the person. The right identity of the aham or the I is actually the atma or the soul of the person. The false identification of the I is the ego. So, to identify the actuality of his existence is never possible for the jiva. He never knows his or her own atma. And in the Hindu religion, this ignorance is widespread. The reason for this is due to the shallow devotion of the person who looks for God outside and just visits temple for fulfilling his selfish motives. So from the ego, all other modifying emotions start to appear. The foundation of this ego is based on desires stationed within the individual. As I described in a previous video, the ego is a part of the four parts of the mind, which is intelligence, storehouse of emotion, the memory and the ego. And that is you, the jiva. The aham or the false I is the identity of the person in the objective world. This false sense of the I, as long as it's not identified, goes unnoticed and subordinates to the emotions of the jiva. The I in this case becomes intense and fierce. This fierceness causes the person to misjudge the objective world itself. The person can overlook his or her own shortcomings. Even beggars have a fierce ego. He or she may say, I got 20 coins today, and how many did you get? See, look, I got more coins than you. My begging is at a higher level than yours. This I makes the individual take multiple words. This I contains all the intense desires as per the individual's wish list. There is a world of existence beside the I, and that is the Atma or the Guru. The Guru is the tether between the person and the Atma. The Guru's Guru needs to be God. If he isn't, then the disciple may be strayed in his spiritual journey. So, this journey has to be carefully treaded by the individual, and he should be cautious in his endeavors. As sins and virtues arrive together in the jiva's life as comrades, this is due to all that goes in the mind of the jiva, the incessant flow of thoughts, and when the person misbehaves, all these penalties the jiva only has to pay in his human existence on earth. and if the character of the man deteriorates, a similar partner is then available with whom he has to spend his life with. The man generally is an animal in this matter. An opposite instance of this was that a man didn't touch his wife until 6 months had passed for their marriage. Due to this reason, at least their love for each other stood up. The reason that he didn't touch his wife was due to the fact that he wasn't a feisty animal. The people are so bossy and domineering in this area that they could molest their partners on the wedding night itself. It seems to the person that he has the right to do this, as he or she has married the person and it's now legal. That's how the other person's mind starts feeling the hurt. Also, when parents search out for alliances for their son, recommend that the character of the daughter of the opposite family should be checked. Why not check your own son's character before checking others' characters? The parents of the son have blind love for their son and they believe that he could definitely do no wrongs. But you see, in a day and age like this, where most of the kids are on the wrong side of things, the male form has just been saved due to the inability to bear children. If this was true by any measure, more than 90% of the males would have had problems while searching for alliances. But the truth of the matter is that the female form have to bear the brunt of such relationships. The male slips out of such scenarios. The mind, due to its intense desires, is so filthy. There is no man or woman that you could find in this day and age whose mind doesn't have vulgar or explicit thoughts. These thoughts make the jiva very foul. Day after day and year after year, the existence of such a person gets layers of filth, and then it is impossible to clean such a person's mind. The person who regularly dwells in vulgar and explicit thoughts, such a person's Chidabhasa is totally darkened. Such a person starts having explicit interest in the opposite sex from very early on. Not just that, even people with reduced intensity of desires also have filthy thoughts. There comes a point in the person's life that they either give up on those thoughts as they get tiring at one point in time, or they turn into other perversions in the case those desires continue to be demanded by the ego. Then it is a vicious circle that the person cannot really come out of. So why do some people have unending perversions and filthy thinking? It is due to the carry forwarding of the desires from the prior life. It leads to the darkening of the Chidabhasa, and the jiva is looking out for ways and means to satisfy his or her own desires. Such persons who have found ways and means to fulfill their immoral actions, their households go under as well. Their marriages don't hold ground, and either of the spouses give a divorce to the other. Such is an outcome of a life of wrongs. This is an arrangement by God. The only exception to this is that by the intervention of a living master, it can be brought to reduce the impact of such actions by the person. The master is able to absorb the negative emotions of the person and give him some breathing space. This absorption happens due to his guru or God taking it in and wiping some of the calculations of past karmas so that the household could function at least in some working state. So these exceptions help a person with bad karmas also to still enjoy a little bit of peaceful existence. In the journey of a man towards realization, he has all the sins, but he has virtues as well. As sins and virtues go hand in hand, the way that a man can get virtuous is by having a balanced nature, and it happens by having a balance or sattva quality within him. When the quality of sattva is dominant in a person, then the life of the jiva goes without hiccups. Man can progress due to this trait. The sattvic person may be inspired to do the right actions. He doesn't stray into wrongdoings. The thinking of such a person is decent and does not have stains of murkiness. Such persons also need a master, as a human is not knowing the Atma, and this inward journey is not known to the householder, even though he is sattvic. The master helps the sattvic individual to start crawling, walking, and then begin driving on the highway of spiritual life. If a sattvic person meets his master, then he would be very attached to his master. He would think about about him the whole day. Sins and virtues are born out of the body. The sins are committed by excessive love for the gross body. Once the mind surrenders to sense gratifications, then the mind gives up into the sense pleasures, and this is never ending. So in order for the mind to not waver towards sense gratification, a devotional life is a necessity. A mind can shape up as virtuous or could shape up as an impure or filthy mind. To shape up as a virtuous mind, the mind should become independent of such desires. Definitely not depend on the I or the ego. This is because if the ego comes under pressure of desires, then senses, desires, intelligence and the mind all come together, start synchronizing by miscalculations, and the pathway to sense pleasures is then unlocked. And once the sins are committed through sense pleasures getting unlocked in the subtle body is now unlocked, and then it keeps on attaching to the person every time he takes birth. The person is stuck in perpetual movie or a scene of a movie, and that is why the scene is so interesting for the person. It is because he is craving for the excitement from his or her own birth. He keeps searching for boyfriends, girlfriends and friends perpetually throughout his life. The person then gets stuck in the scene, and the scene is part of his desires, and these desires are dancing in his mind. In order to forget the movie or the scene of the movie, the person needs to close his eyes and get away from the world of desires. The person should therefore be inspired to do the right actions. These right actions would cause the person to have an elevated life in the now and in the next birth. These karmas generate the fruits for the sins and virtues, and in the source of these karmas that are in the thought of the person, the source of these thoughts are in the inspiration of the jiva, and in the inspiration lies the desires. And with devotion, the inspiration changes and the thoughts improve, the desires calm down, and everything changes to the positive to make the individual move to the positive direction, and the filthiness and murky thoughts recede. How did you like the video on sins and virtues? Please let me know in the comment section below. I will see you in the next video.